Welcome everyone to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA. It really does sound that I'm having fun doing this because I am really having fun doing this. Welcome to another episode where I talk about making high availability and disaster recovery practical, specifically when it comes to SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, which is kind of like my area of expertise. Although it's not just about SQL Server, it's not just about the technology. In fact, most of the topics that I cover throughout my these episodes um, are the things that we technical professionals don't pay attention to. And I call them the non-technical aspects because they play a very important role. In fact, I came up with a concept called PPT manifesto when it comes to dealing with high availability and disaster recovery. The first P stands for people, having the right people in place to make sure that you are meeting your recovery objectives, service level agreements as far as HA and DR solutions are concerned. The second P is about processes, depending on who you're talking to. And this is key because part of understanding or part of implementing a really good high availability and disaster recovery strategy is knowing how the process looks like. It's not just all about the technology, although the T part of the PPT manifesto is technology. I want to focus today on the first P, which is the people, and I'm just gonna throw out the title of today's episode: Risks of having untrained operational staff in your HADR solution. It keeps popping up whenever I'm being pulled into a consulting project where somebody would bring in a subject matter expert like me in a project, and one of the things that I looked at first is the quality of the people on the team, because more often than not, when somebody says I want to build X, where X happens to be that solution and it's complicated and it is well architected as far as I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, when I leave, for instance, we implement a project, production go live, we stabilize the entire environment, and then I leave. What happens? Are the people on the internal team, the sysadmin, the DBA, the network guys, are they capable of supporting this infrastructure or this solution moving forward? I'm not going to be a part of their team forever. I'm only going to be there during the whole project. Are they capable of making sure that when this goes production or when this goes live, they are capable and available to take care of this? And it's just interesting because we're dealing with high availability solutions, mission critical applications. We're dealing with something that requires highly trained, skilled technology professional. I was telling a story the other day about how when I broke my leg about almost 6 years ago now, or 6 years ago now, interestingly, I was going through surgery, and I wouldn't want the doctor or the surgeon performing the surgery to be fresh out of university, has not done his internship yet or his residency yet. I want to make sure that the doctor, the surgeon doing the surgery has done this several times so that I feel comfortable. Besides, I wouldn't know. I was on anesthesia, and by the time I woke up, it's done. So I wouldn't know if he was the guy or somebody else was doing it. I wouldn't know. But it just makes you feel safe knowing that whoever is performing the operation, the surgery, is highly trained. He's done this a couple of times. He can probably do it with his eyes closed. Hopefully not. But in the same way, we're allowing people who have not been properly trained, who do not know how the system works, who have no idea how the solution was architected and designed. At the end of a project, we just hand it off to them. And we are doing both the business and the operational team, the operational engineers, a disservice if we don't properly train them, because we're putting a lot of risks, not just on the point of view, or not just on the business by having untrained operational staff, but also to them, because in an emergency situation when they don't know what to do, They go on a panic. And this is one thing that I tell my customers. Nobody thinks about this when they're building an availability group, when they're building a failover cluster, or a stretched cluster across multiple AWS regions, or different Azure data sets. Nobody thinks about the guy taking care of operations who could not calm down because he's panicking because this is the first time he's done this. So I want to talk about the risks of having untrained operational staff in your HADR solutions. You know me by now. You probably seen me hold one of these. It's my notes. I realize that because my background is white, whenever I put something in there, it disappears. The mind blown. I try not to use green screen. Anyway, take notes. Grab your pen and paper. Here's number one. The risk of having untrained operational staff managing HADR solutions. Number one, they can and will cause outages. They can and will cause outages. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. They will make mistakes. We humans make mistakes. Even people who are trained make mistakes. How much more will somebody who has not been trained properly in handling high availability and disaster recoveries, how much more are those people not going to make mistakes? Man, I could count. I could list more than a dozen of the cases that I happen to be a part of. They would bring me in. There was an outage, but the very first case that I worked on, this was more than a decade and a half ago. I was working as a data center engineer. I was doing your typical operating system patches. Downloaded the Windows patches, installed them, and this is a traditional failover clustered instance. Following best practice, installed it on the secondary node, the standby node, installed, reboot, well and good. The failover clustered instance is still up and running. Now, this happens to be our weekend schedule for installing patches for production. That is UAT and staging. We do it on weekday, no big deal. But for production, we do it on weekend so as not to disrupt business operations. We install the patches, and it's not just me. Keep in mind, this is an entire infrastructure that we need to patch. I was taking care of the failover clustered instance, installed the Windows updates, and then rebooted the secondary replica. And I'm about to install the patches on the primary instance, or the primary node, or the active. I don't want to call it active, standby. So I was about to install it, done installation, done everything, and I'm about to reboot. I let my boss know because he was taking care of some other stuff, and said, "Sure, go ahead. We have a change management request that says we are going to perform these maintenance, reboot the server after installation of patches." Well and good. Reboot. I was expecting the failover cluster to do its work. Was 3 minutes later, nothing. 5 minutes later, nothing. And I knew for a fact, because I was working on a physical machine, I knew how long it takes typically to reboot this particular machine. I believe this was, the old IBM S series. I can't remember. And I know for a fact that it can take on average about 2 to 3 minutes to reboot. But then I know for a fact that the failover cluster should be able to take care of the failover, meaning the failover cluster, when I reboot the machine, has to move the failover clustered instance from that primary node to the standby node. But then 3 minutes later, 5 minutes later, nothing. What is going on? And because we had alerting in place, I got an alert that says your failover clustered instance is down. Okay. 7 minutes later, nothing. So I called. I talked to my boss and I asked, "So what's going on?" And he said, "I don't know. Go ask the operations guy." I reached out, picked up the phone, and called the operations team, who are also doing maintenance, like they're installing patches, cumulative updates. Lo and behold, they rebooted all domain controllers at the same time. Now, here's the thing. We have, on average, about 4 or 5 domain controllers in our production environment, 2 in DR data center. They rebooted all four at the same time. If you've had any experience rebooting domain controllers, you know it takes a while. About 15, 20 minutes. One of the reasons why you're not supposed to be rebooting domain controllers at the same time. Now, one of the reason why my failover cluster did not failover properly, or could not even failover, is because a failover requires authenticating against an Active Directory domain. I couldn't, because there was no domain controller available for the failover cluster to authenticate. And I was just sitting, okay. We're all waiting until all of the domain controllers, or at least one domain controller, is up and running. We're just waiting because I couldn't do anything. So I needed to wait. And this is one of those examples where, because they're not aware, the operational team, right? Again, it's in the change management request. Everything has been approved. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But because they're not aware that there are failover clusters involved that depend on Active Directory being there, they just did what they were told without really understanding that what they did caused, in my case, about 10 to 15 minutes of downtime. The good thing about it is it was within the maintenance window. We are not going past our requested maintenance window. Well and good, but that taught me a very valuable lesson. If the operational team isn't aware, or the operational engineers are not aware that what they're doing is impacting some high availability and or disaster recovery solution, man, your recovery point, or recovery time objectives, and your SLAs are going to get affected. And you, because you're the one responsible for it, you're going to get the blame. Just saying. And again, I could count several instances. Another one where a Windows guy was doing patching. I don't know what it is with patching. They were doing patching, and you know how it is. They would use failover cluster, and especially with large organizations where you have segregation of duties, where the sysadmins cannot do anything on the SQL Server side, and only the DBAs will do work on the SQL Server side, but not on the Windows side. So when a Windows update is available, it's the Windows team taking care of that. But they're not aware of the fact that I'm not supposed to be using failover cluster management console to move stuff around, because SQL Server always on availability groups, I'm referring to that. Availability groups require more than just the node to be available. It's looking for stuff like, is the database healthy? Are all of the databases healthy? Is the AG healthy? Are the databases synchronized? All of these things you cannot see from within the Windows Server failover cluster management console. But because, again, the sysadmins are just doing what they were told, they wouldn't know. And it is causing outages. It's one of the reasons why, again, I'm working on a current project right now where they wanted, before they even proceed with production go live, they wanted their sysadmins, together with their database admins, to be properly trained on what is going on within the network as you're building an AG, a failover is happening, all of these things, so that everybody's on the same page for when stuff like, we need to install patches. And by the way, it's the Windows sysadmins who will be doing this. What do the DBAs need to tell them, right? Again, getting everybody on the same page and properly training them to make sure that they do not cause outages. Couldn't count the number of cases that I have been involved in. There's VMs being maintained that the VM admins were not aware of, were part of an AG. There are switches that are being patched, but the network admins are not aware that the switches are where the physical machines, the clusters, are connected. All of these things are causing outages just because the people in the operational team are not aware of what else is going on, other than the fact that they're just doing what they've been doing for years. So that's the first one. I know it took a lot. I know it took much longer time than I wanted to on that one, because again, I can count more than a dozen, almost up to 100 cases now where I get pulled in, called in, and it's an outage situation. Recover the database, recover the SQL Server instance, and then asking the question, what happened? Lo and behold, somebody else who did not know how AGs work or how failover clustering works was doing maintenance. Number two, number two. Well, another risk of having untrained operational staff in your HADR solution is that they will affect your SLA, your RTO, and your RPO. They would influence that. They would impact that. Going back to that story where the operational engineer rebooted all of the domain controllers. If we did not request for a maintenance window, and that happened in production on a regular business day, we were all going to be in big trouble. It took, on average, in our case, about 15 to 20 minutes, and that's just for one domain controller. We had a domain controller running on IBM series. I forgot what they were called, and they were daisy chained to come up with a more powerful machine that took. I timed it about 40 minutes to reboot. So imagine if this was a normal business day, and all of a sudden they decided, hey, we're going to reboot all of our domain controllers just because, or maybe they asked for permission, they were approved, and somebody signed off on a change management request, went ahead, 20, 30, 40 minutes to reboot the main. So that's potentially 20, 30 minutes or 40 minutes of downtime for not just people logging into the main controller, not just authenticating users, but in that case, for the failover cluster that needed to be online ASAP. There's a reason why we had the failover cluster. We needed minutes worth, we need to meet minutes worth of recovery time objective. And in that case, it went beyond 20 minutes. So definitely our RTO was impacted. Good thing it was a failover clustered instance where, the minute that we rebooted the machine, no transactions were coming in. So sure, we were not able to do transactions while the databases are down, but the good thing, again, we asked for a maintenance window. But what if this was a normal business day, there were transactions, it would have blown past our recovery time objective and our service level agreement. And there are penalties when you're working in the financial industry and you're not meeting regulation and policies required by the industry. There's a huge penalty. Not just we went past or went beyond our recovery time objective in SLA. There are financial penalties associated with that. So again, these the people were not aware. All they did was, yes, this is what was in the ticket. This is what was in the change management request. It was approved. My boss went ahead and approved it. I'll go ahead and do it. Not aware. And then it went to about 20, 30 minutes or 40 plus minutes just to reboot a domain controller, which then impacted our high availability solution. So the untrained staff would definitely affect your recovery time objective, SLA, or sometimes even RPO or recovery point objective. So that's number two. Again, it's a direct correlation with number one, where they would cause an outage, and eventually, because they're not aware of how high availability disaster recovery works, how the solution works. They're also probably not aware of what the recovery time objectives are, what the SLAs are, right? Because they're just doing day-to-day normal business and tech operations stuff, right? Number three, and this is something that I never realized happens, especially in a tightly knit operational team, right? Number three, make sure you're ready for this. They will propagate or reproduce bad habits. they will propagate or reproduce bad habits. We're still humans, right? You We look up to people who are more senior, who has more experience. We look up to them, and we also want to be accepted within the group. And again, this is not something that I realized was happening. And the reason I had to include this is because until AI, automation, and robotics, not even the cloud, uh, has fully taken over everything that we do, humans are still going to be doing the work, right? Number three is they will propagate and reproduce bad habits. Uh, one case. I was helping a client migrate an HA and DR solution. But before I do that, what I do is I do an assessment just to make sure that everything's correct. Because the last thing you want is to grab everything from the existing environment and just copy it over to the new environment as part of upgrade and migration, not realizing that there are bad practices, bad config, bad everything. I want to clean it up first so that when I move it to a new environment, it's all clean. I was looking at this setup, and one of the reasons why they wanted me to re-architect the setup was because it was causing a ton of outages. Um, 4-node Windows Server failover cluster running 4-replica availability group. And I looked at the design. The design was horrible, and not in the architecture sense, but in the config sense. Uh, Same subnet delay and same subnet thresholds were tweaked to prevent outages from happening. And I asked them, so why was this done? Because I didn't know what happened. Why was this done? Oh, our Windows sysadmin did this. Our former Windows sysadmin did this because we were encountering outages after outages because of some heartbeat issues, and so he tweaked the same subnet delay and same subnet threshold parameter values on a failover cluster. It's like, okay, but why did he do that? Well, that's what they did with his former colleague, the one who set up the entire failover cluster, but now he left. Turned out the person who built the failover cluster told this guy who kept changing the same subnet delay that this is how it's done. The guy who designed it was a more senior engineer. He's been doing it for quite a while. And that's exactly what he told this new guy who replaced him. He was replaced by this new guy because he had to leave. Just the idea, the changing config, in that example, same subnet delay, same subnet threshold, just the idea of changing config so as to prevent outages from happening in and of itself is a bad idea. You're simply trying to fix a symptom, not the root cause. I asked them, so did you talk to network engineers? Well, the outages disappeared, so I think they did something right. Okay, but did you ask your network engineers what's going on with the network? No. Basically, the old practice worked, and now the more senior engineer was telling the junior engineer how it's done. So now this bad habits being passed on from generation to generation to again, especially in a tightly knit operational team. There's another case that I work on rather, where Active Directory, they were cleaning up Active Directory objects, and one guy was saying, "Hey, what's this thing here? It says this is the name," and one engineer said, "Oh, I don't know what that is. Just go ahead and delete it." Deleted the cluster name object. No, not the cluster name object. The virtual computer object associated with the listener name. Okay. Understand that the virtual computer object for the listener name exists in Active Directory. He deleted that because they're doing cleanups, and anything that's not in the documentation, they'll clean it up. Sure. They were doing an audit, they clean it up. Sure. No harm, no foul. Until 3 weeks later, Yes, because again, the Active Directory object, you delete the object until you need to re-log in and authenticate against Active Directory. That thing, will just sit there and do nothing. 3 weeks later, somebody performed maintenance, failed over the availability group, and now the availability group could not fail over. Why? Because the listener names corresponding virtual computer object in Active Directory no longer exists. So there's nothing to authenticate to. And so they couldn't fail over. Surprise, surprise. And this is again one of those things where, yeah, the more senior engineer said, just go ahead, do it. It's not a document. Again, they were just following. They were just doing what they were told. But what they were told is now being propagated. So next thing, besides 3 weeks later, he would not think that what he did 3 weeks ago was what caused this. So they're passing on misinformation, bad behavior, bad habits, and now it becomes a part of your operational process. And again, I did not even think about this because, for one, when you have a proper operational procedure, you're trying as much as possible to prevent stuff like this from happening. But you cannot prevent colleagues from talking to each other, one colleague respecting somebody who's more senior and just following what he's saying, even though sometimes he's just saying that because it was also what he was told by a more senior engineer within the organization. And we are passing on information that becomes habit, that becomes a part of the operational process, even though it's not properly documented, even though it's not a best practice, even though it's counter to how your HA solutions and your DR solutions work. That's the risk. And again, I had to throw this in here because I've seen it happen so many times that I think unless we train our excuse me, unless we train our engineers, operations staff, excuse me, unless we properly train our operational staff, people who would be responding to tickets, people who would be uh, uh, people who would be responsible for performing operational stuff like installing patches, uh, rebooting machines, or any of the operational work, unless we properly train them on how HA and DR solutions that we have affect um, business continuity, meaning an outage, how it would affect your recovery point, recovery time objectives, and SLA, and how that gets propagated across the team, we are going to have these risks. The question is, are you willing to take on the risk? Of course, if you're the manager, you're going to be taking the blame for it because you're responsible for them. Are you willing to bear those risks? Is the business willing to bear those risks? The reason, again, why you have high availability in or disaster recovery solutions is because you want to protect and prevent these things from happening. But you definitely don't want the people who are taking care of this to be be the ones causing the issues, right? You don't want them, and you can't blame them. They're not aware. They're not properly trained. They're just doing as they were told. And the basic human need to belong, I don't want them to think about me being stupid or ignorant or I don't know this, and I don't want to feel bad about that. I want to feel like I belong. I want to project, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's human nature. But the thing is, it's causing risks to the business, and instead of them being a part of the team that makes sure that we're preventing these things from happening, they're the ones causing these outages and incidents. And that's again one of the reasons why I talk about the people and the process aspect of high availability, because this is very, very important. That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Tune in again next week for another topic. And if you feel like, oh, my team is not well prepared for something like this, they're missing, there are gaps within their knowledge, they do not understand how failover clustering works, or how it interacts with Active Directory, or how it works under the covers, or they're uh, our senior engineer just left, and now we have to take care and support our availability group, but our internal staff isn't ready. Talk to me, reach out, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. That link will redirect you to my calendar page where you can pick and choose a time that works for you. And in the strategy session, we're going to talk about what your needs are, understanding what challenges you have, what's working and what's not working. And we'll come up with a strategy that would help serve you best to make sure that you are preventing these risks from happening in the first place, right? Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. Let's have that conversation. And if I can help in however capacity, I will. If not, I will steer you in the direction that would help achieve your high availability and disaster recovery goals. All right. That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA, the R Show. Enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye.